Welcome once again to Return to Israel. I'm Anthony and I'm connecting with Gedaliah Blum, our associate in Israel. And Gedaliah, we want to find out what's happening on the ground there in Israel with regards to the release of the Trump peace plan. Is this something that people are considering good? There's a lot of details I know that we can't really talk about, but they haven't really been clarified. One of them is that it looks like they're calling for a two-state Palestinian territory, a state within a state. And we know that that's suicidal, that that is not going to work. It's not God's promise. He gave the land to Israel, but yet it's on the table. Is this going to go through, or what do you think is going to happen, Gedaliah? Give us some feedback there from Eli, where you're at.
So it's very funny because there is no consensus right now. There's no consensus with the left. There's no consensus with the right. As usual, Donald Trump had created controversy here in Israel. And you know what? We do respect him. And when I say we, the people of Judea and Samaria, he's been a great friend of Israel. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He fulfilled a promise that many presidents previously had unfulfilled. He had recognized the Golan Heights as Israeli sovereignty, and of course, now this plan. Now this plan is really about moving the goalposts. It's about it's about changing the narrative between we're going to create a Palestinian state, two-state solution with 67 borders as the starting point, to that the Trump administration had recognized that Judea and Samaria is the ancestral land of the Jewish people, that there's a Jewish connection, and that there is no need to remove the Jews from Judea and Samaria if there was ever going to be a Palestinian state. So the consensus, like I said, there is no consensus. There are people on the right who are coming out today who are saying that the plan is a no-go. We will never recognize a Palestinian state. And then there's others like me who are, I think, a little more moderate and more practical to say, we accept the plan as is, and now let's turn to the Arabs and let's see if they're going to fulfill their obligations towards this plan. Mm-hmm. And only then will we ever consider a Palestinian state, which is actually built into the plan. Now, there are a lot of contingencies for the Palestinians to fulfill, many of them which they've already drawn their red lines in the past. So for me, I'm able to take a more practical, moderate approach by not throwing standing up and saying we are not accepting any of this, to we'll accept it and let the Arabs go ahead through their own behavior, reject the plan, and enable us to then move forward.
So it sounds like that you and the moderates like you are hinging your bets, as it were, that, again, the Arabs have shown an aptitude where they never miss a deal because they always miss it. I mean, it started in 1948 when the plan was being presented for two states back then. And Israel accepted, and it was rejected by the Arabs. That led to the 48 War of Independence. And here we are now over 70 years later. And this is still what they're demanding. It's in the Trump plan. But yeah, in reality, it hasn't really moved forward in a way. I mean, there's been some concessions given to the Palestinians to have their government and be armed and so forth. Is that a possibility that then when they reject, that then they lose entirely their state? Is that what we've seen in the Trump plan?
Well, I mean, nothing is written in the Trump plan, but we see from the Trump administration that they are saying that you're running out of chances, that the Palestinian Arabs are running out of chances. And if they don't take this opportunity in a $50 billion check in order to fulfill the destiny, the humanitarian rights of people to be able to live a prosperous life and to have opportunity, then they're not going to have this kind of chance in the future. Again, this is a very political statement because Donald Trump is not going to be in office forever. So we never know who's going to come afterwards and whether or not Donald Trump is able to set precedent at this point. It's really hard to understand really what the implications are. But I'll tell you, you said that I was more moderate, and I even said that myself. But I wouldn't say I'm more moderate. I don't believe in a Palestinian state, and I do believe that a Palestinian state under the current conditions are suicidal. We saw what happened when we left southern Lebanon. We got Hezbollah. We saw when we left Gaza, we got Hamas. Everywhere we leave fills a vacuum of Islamic jihadism, and it becomes dangerous for all Israel and civilians. So I 100% under these conditions, I do not believe that we would ever leave any of this land to be filled by this vacuum. But I'm saying that I'm more moderate because it's more of a tactics in the same strategy. I believe that the rejectionism from the Arabs is really wearing down the international community. It's wearing down the Gulf states, who are much more in line with the future, with Israel as a friend, as an economic friend, as an energy friend, as a technology friend, because everybody knows that oil is not going to be their cash cow for the next few generations. Right. And so they need to look forward. And so Israel is the answer. Israel became the answer, and they're looking at their own survival as being much more important to them than continuing to use the Palestinian issue as their world, the center of all the world's problems. And so the international community is being worn down by the rejectionism of the Arabs.
Yeah, no, we see that happening, and we did an interview just recently with Baruch Gordon of Bethel, Arutz Sheva, Israel National News, and Baruch said it very plainly, and I'm sure you recognize it too as a resident there in Samaria, that the reality has changed, and even Abu Mazen, Abbas's son, is recognizing, Dad, forget it. This two-state idea is passé. It was from the and it was never accepted. It wasn't. They're not even showing the Arabs in their leadership. I mean, goodness, Abbas was supposed to have had another election. This has been 15 years ago, and we are contacting, as you know, people, Arab Christians, Arab Muslims, that are saying, no, we don't want a Palestinian state. We want to be under Israeli sovereignty. So, Gedaliah, the question on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people's minds, is, why bother? Why doesn't, Prime Minister Netanyahu or whoever's going to be in the, whoever gets elected here on March 2nd, just show some leadership like, Begin did and annexed the Golan Heights and others have done, and just simply say, no, we're going to move forward because, the Jewish people have got encoded, built into Torah, their biblical values, that they're going to respect the Palestinian people. Why do the Palestinian Arabs want to live under Israeli sovereignty? Is because they know they won't get a better life anywhere else. So just take the question out of everybody's mind and move forward with it. Why doesn't that happen?
Well, obviously, it has to do with diplomacy. It has to do with foreign diplomacy, and I think that Benjamin Netanyahu has a lot to weigh out. He's got a lot on his shoulders, aside from the indictment, hanging over his head right now. But he's got normal diplomatic channels and responses from different world leaders that are invested in the Palestinian state. They've put in billions and billions of dollars. They don't have anything to show for it. But just like the Jewish people are a stiff-necked people, so are the world. There's a stubbornness to say, listen, we've invested. There's a whole industry. It's $1 trillion industry, this peace industry. Yeah. There's so many jobs, so many people or families are reliant on international aid through UNRWA, through the UN, through the EU, through the Arab League. There's so many different non-NGOs. There's so many different organizations, Peace Now, even on the Jewish side, B'Tselem. It's $1 trillion industry, and it's not so easy for them to say, we're ready for a solution. We're ready for Israel to not annex, not have, not to have sovereignty, but to apply a liberal democracy, the law across the land, which anybody in their right mind shouldn't be fighting. We should want these Arabs to have civil liberties, freedom of speech, the ability to prosper, to be able to earn a living, to travel freely. All of these things are not happening because the Palestinian Authority is being propped up because, again, there's an industry around this piece. There's no interest in solving this issue, not for the Palestinian Authority and not for anybody who's making money from this. And I feel bad for the European Union, who are just blinded by their Jew hatred. I'm sorry to say, but they're blinded by their Jew hatred, that they are so focused on just driving a wedge or sticking us with a needle in the back and turning a complete blind eye to the real human rights that are being committed against the Arabs by the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. Yes. And so here we are today wondering at what point, like you said, what point is Bibi just going to say, we're going to apply sovereignty? And I think the answer lies with when the world becomes so fatigued, and at the same time, the Gulf Arab states become much more invested in our relationship. And on top of that, when we believe that we have the courage to say, we're just going to do it. And Arabs are generally a paper tiger. I mean, the world, the sky was supposed to fall when the U.S. Embassy landed in Jerusalem, but it didn't. Nothing happened. There was a few riots, there was this, that, but nothing happened. And I think that we're afraid of the Arabs. And it's very condescending, because we somehow expect them not to act like responsible adults, instead acting like animals. And so here we are, the whole world, in fact, doesn't take them doesn't make them accountable for their own actions. And so when they act a certain way, it must be a response to something. And, it's very condescending, it's very racist. And there's actually a saying, it's a bigotry of low expectations, which is really the worst, the worst that you could be, because you look at somebody and you're acting condescending. In fact, I spoke to somebody recently who speaks to a lot of the Palestinian Arabs, and they are very aware of this discrimination. They're very aware of this racism, and they're a very proud people. And so when the world looks at them as saying, well, you're not capable of such actions or such behaviors, it insults them. So I believe that we should just, like I said, eventually the timing is going to happen where Israel's going to have to apply sovereignty, and that's it. Yeah.
It's going to have to, because on one hand, like you said, if the world's got to wait for more public assent from the Arab, the Gulf communities, and so forth to endorse this, that ain't going to happen, because we know that they've got their political constituents, as it were, to keep peace in their countries. And so it really almost sounds like it's boiling down to, coming back to, what are the Jewish people going to do? And, I guess the big thing that's hanging over everybody's head is the threat of violence. What's happening on the Har Habayit Temple Mount as a result of the Trump peace plan. We saw a little bit of news there that there was some terrorist attack. There was a couple of rockets fired. But here we are now. We're coming up on the beginning of the week after the announcement. Is there any concern on your part? What are you seeing there as far as fear and threats of violence, Gedaliah?
I mean, listen, the Palestinian Authority calls for days of rage. And, there's always like this joke, there's the Palestinian calendar. It's like day of rage, day of rage, day of rage, day of rage, day off, day of rage. Day of rage. So it's like, when, it's much better. I lived in Scotland for a year, and when the newscast, the weather forecast would say, there's a chance of sun spells today, because so they didn't call for rain. They said when it wasn't going to rain, that's when it was. So that's what the Palestinian Authority should do. They shouldn't be calling for a day of rage. They should be telling us when there aren't any days of rage. But so the Palestinian Authority essentially lost control of their own people. They don't march out to the street when they're commanded to anymore. They realized the first intifada, the second intifada, there's only one loser, and that's the Arabs. The people on the ground are losing and losing and losing from the directive of the Palestinian Authority, who never sends their own children out, by the way.
No.
They never send out their own children. They send other people's children because their children are too busy, dipping into their offshore accounts for all the international aid that's coming in. You see the same thing in Gaza. Hamas closes the schools, and they commandeer all the buses, and they tell all the kids to get on the bus and to go. And now we're seeing a lot of the parents aren't sending their kids to the bus. So they're sick of it. They're sick of this fighting. They're sick of sacrificing themselves for these corrupt politicians who are talking about fighting for the people on the ground. But at the end of the day, they're fighting for themselves. They're trying to retain power. They're looking to perpetuate this conflict in order that international aid will continue to flow in freely, and they can continue to pay terrorists $150 million a year. They could continue to build terror tunnels. They could continue to do all these terrible things that the world turns a blind eye against, again, because either of Jew hatred, the anti-Semitism, they're much happier seeing the Jews get the a needle in the back, or again, they're condescending towards the Arabs and saying, you are not expected to behave any better than that.
So to sum it up, Gedaliah, it looks like the chances are the Trump peace plan is going to be given a go, and that if the Arabs don't step up to the plate, the Palestinian Authority, and show some true leadership, show that they're willing to recognize Israel and stop this slave for pay and some of the other red lines that have been built into the Trump plan. If they don't do that, then they're going to lose out. And hopefully then the business part of the provision of the U.S. administration, the $50 billion check that was being talked about will come, and that Israel will be able to implement this sovereignty and give the Arabs a better life, which at the end of the day, we know there's a significant majority of Arab people on the street. They're not allowed to speak about it. They're afraid for their lives because of the threats of danger from the Palestinian Authority, but many of them are calling for, wanting secretly, Israeli sovereignty. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks leading up to the election and then what follows. But thank you for taking time for us, and we'll look forward to speaking with you again, and maybe some others that you can bring as experts, as it were, who've been there in the inner circle and know what's going on. Gedaliah, really thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
All right. Well, people that have watched this, we trust that you enjoyed it, and we know you have a choice. We thank you for coming and watching us here at Return to Israel. I'm Anthony Abma, founder and CEO, and our correspondent in Israel, Gedaliah Blum.